Heather Whaling, thank you for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. How are you today? What's going on?
I am good. It's like finally fall temperature. It feels like fall temperatures this week, so it's lovely. It's great. It's a good morning.
Yeah, school's back in session. I know your son's in school, my kids are in school,
Yeah.
but it's that fake fall, right? Like I think we still
Yeah.
have, and
It's
we
gonna be
have,
like 90 next week.
yeah. I know somebody told me that yesterday, and I didn't look that far ahead, but I know September always has lots of surprises in store. So I'm always like, hang on, guys, we're not quite there yet.
Not quite. Working on it.
We're working on it. Did you cold plunge this morning?
I did not. I almost went this morning, but I stayed up too late watching the convention last night, and so I did not get moving early enough to get a cold plunge in this morning. But I think I'm going to go this weekend.
Nice, nice. It seems to be a common theme on the podcast. I've talked to quite a few people who are, and I know I do, but into the cold therapy, and I know that you're a big kind of a newbie to it, but I believe I saw on social media, are you rocking like 10 minutes at a time now?
Yeah, so when I go, I try to do 15 minutes. So I'll do 10 minutes, then I'll warm up, and then I'll do another 5 minutes.
Mm, no,
It's very cold.
that's
But I
that.
always feel so much better. It's amazing. I'm new. I've only been doing it for a couple months, but it's amazing how much better I feel.
Yeah, but rocking it like a seasoned pro. Yeah, 10 minutes is no joke. If anyone has hasn't done it, I strive to do it every day. I don't always succeed, but if I can get 3 minutes a day every day,
That's great.
I think the science is somewhere in there. But do you see that, Heather, with I guess some of the high achievers that you have either in your circle or that you come across just like in general? And I know everybody and anybody can practice cold therapy, but what kind of wellness practices are you doing, and what are you seeing? I know you're a very high energy, highly motivated type person. It seems to be more common now where high achievers are taking that deep breath and saying, okay, what can I do to balance and get recentered? What are you seeing, and what are you practicing?
I think that what I have come to realize, at least for myself, is if you want to function at like your optimal productivity or creativity, then you have to be functioning at your optimal wellness. And I think there's a direct correlation between how well you are feeling is then how productive and how creative you can be. So, um, I think it's similar to the conversation around rest, right? Like I don't think rest is a nice to have. I think rest is the opposite side of the productive creative coin. If you want to be productive and creative, you have to rest. You also have to take care of your wellness as a whole, rest being just one piece of that. So I do, I mean, what, you know, it's a funny thing with entrepreneurs, right? Because I think we're not very good at just sort of doing things halfway. We like go all the way in, and maybe that's why like so many people do long distance rides or long distance running. It's like I don't know a lot of entrepreneurs that just run like a mile. It seems more like they're the ones that like, no, let's go to a half marathon or a full marathon or a try or whatever. Um, but I also think that I think for at least myself, whether I'm cold plunging or I like to bike, it's also that time where I can just disconnect. My phone is not near me. I'm not being like bothered, interrupted, and it's really just time for myself. And that there's all kinds of research around like the brain science, but that's when I think my best ideas also happen. Like they're sort of in the subconscious. Your brain is still working on those big things you're trying to move forward, and the dots are able to connect in a different way. So
Mm,
there's many benefits.
yeah, no, you bring up a good point with not to go down the path of wellness and sleep the entire podcast, but I think it's so true. I had Dr. Sean Bailey on a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, "Look, I could do a whole episode on sleep alone because," and I've unpacked a lot of it, with my own personal life, and I now use a sleep tracker and kind of nerded up with deep sleep and REM sleep, and so I think you bring up a good point. Is I can tell if I'm off, and it could be
Mm-hmm.
diet, it could just be life in general. But there's most times the common denominator is, oh, I didn't get good sleep last night, or maybe it's been, 2 or 3 nights out of the past week. And so it definitely catches up with you. And it's almost like a superpower. Do you feel like that? It's like when you're on, you are just on, well rested. And like you said, I know a
Yeah.
lot of entrepreneurs feel that way.
I use an app to track my sleep, but it focuses on sleep debt. So it looks almost like a rolling, like 2 week average of what your sleep was versus how much does your body need. And then you can track like if your sleep debt is getting too high. And the piece of the app that I also really love is then sort of based on your sleep and like when you went to bed, how quality your sleep was, it'll give you your energy cycle for the next day. So like when is high energy and when will you have like an energy dip? And that has been really helpful for me in thinking about like how I design my days so that like normally my like most productive times are from like 9 to 11 or like 8 to 10, something in there. So then I know there's a certain type of work then that I should reserve and do during those high energy times. And I always have an energy dip around like 1 to 3 in the afternoon. And so then that's when I do more of the like catch up on my email or like kind of more menial or like administrative tasks or things that don't require a lot of like thought and brain power. And so having that, I'm a big data nerd, but having that data then has allowed me to sort of design my day to maximize the time that I am spending at work so that I can get the most out of each of those hours, right? We all only have 24 hours. I can't reinvent time, but I can figure out how do I make the most out of the time that I have. So when I'm working, I'm really dialed in. And then when I'm done working, like I want to hang out with my kid or I want to go work out or hang out with my friends, like do other things. And I don't feel this pressure then of like, oh my gosh, I have to keep working because I didn't get everything done.
Hmm. Now that brings up a good point. I don't feel a lot of people talk about or maybe shine a light on is, and especially some of the listeners out there, some of the some of the dreamers is creativity is really born for me in the morning, and I think you nail the 8 to 10, 9 to 11 time block, but that's not always the case. I know with life and meetings get in the way. Do you have a hack that you use? I mean, for decades, people said, oh, it's the midday crash. I need caffeine. And do you use anything like it's 2 o'clock and you've got to write something? Or I know you do some speaking throughout the course of your career. Is there a time where you have to tap into creativity in the afternoon or something that's normally like, okay, for Heather at 9 a.m. this was easy, but at 2 p.m. is more challenging. Is there anything that you kind of lean on to get back in that state?
Yeah, I think if you change your environment, you can change your energy. So sometimes if I have to do, like if I'm really working on something and I need a like kind of a burst of creativity and it's sort of outside of my like peak productive window, then maybe I'll go to like a coffee shop or I'll go outside or just sort of changing up the environment can be enough to sort of force function that shift in energy that can help you be creative. But the other thing too, I have learned to stop trying to force creativity. That when I try to
Mm.
force the creativity, that's not when my best ideas happen. And then I'm spending twice as long trying to come up with the idea. Whereas if I just put it down and I come back to it tomorrow morning or when I'm feeling like in a state of flow or really dialed in, the idea will happen much faster and it'll be better. So I also think that stop trying to force it. It'll come when it comes.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great tool. Definitely take that one. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I have my best ideas in the shower," or some people, like you said, on a long run. I know some runners will go for a 5 mile run. They come back with, things in their mind that they didn't have prior to. But it's funny. I don't know if it's I'm sure there's a science breakdown of the elevation, but when I'm flying sometimes in a plane, like I just have all these ideas. I don't know if you ever have that. What I,
So I work with a mindfulness and meditation coach, and he told me that he told me I should try meditating in the airplane because the energy is so when you're like on the ground with all the people, you're surrounded by like city noise and city energy and all the other people energy. Like there's so much more on the ground versus when you get up, it's a totally different like energetic plane. There's way less people, there's way less distractions and cars and things moving. And so the meditation experience, I think, is very different up in an airplane. And maybe that ties into like why, from an idea standpoint too. There's an author who I know, who I followed online. His name is Peter Shankman. And I think he wrote his first book in the airplane. Like he literally booked a flight like across the world and wrote his whole book then because he was like up in the air and he knew he'd be like undistracted and he could get the work done that he needed to get done.
wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's funny too because there are some good ideas that I'll come back down to earth literally, and a couple of days later I'll go back. But then there's some ideas I'm like, what was that? That's an awful idea, or that doesn't make sense, But back to the dreaming theme is I think, like you said, and that makes sense that your meditation coach would say that is there's no rules, and I think you just feel more unrestricted and less. A greater energy and probably less distraction. So that makes sense. Um, awesome. So let's get into how you got here in your career and the big dream that you had years and years ago. I know that you're a seasoned vet now when it comes to the space that you're in. But Heather, when did you know that the public relations, marketing, communication field was going to be for you? Was that something from a young age that you just knew, or is it as you evolved and your head on a swivel and looking at different types of career paths? Oh, that looks interesting. Like, when did you kind of start to go down this path that got you here today?
I always enjoyed writing in school, and then I was like the yearbook editor my junior and senior year of high school, and started to explore journalism as a career. Started out college as a journalism major, and then quickly realized like I didn't actually want to be a journalist. PR is really just the other side of that. So a huge part of a job of a PR person is working with journalists every day to help them figure out what stories, what are the stories that they're telling, what sources do they need, what's trending. And so it's sort of like just a little, like a couple steps away from being a journalist, sort of in a slightly different direction, but very similar of this idea of like storytelling and writing and creativity. So I went to college, was a communications major with a political science minor. I'm one of the like oddities, I think, of people who actually use their major every day still. I maybe wish I would have taken some more business classes in college. I didn't take any, so I didn't really think I was ever going to like own my own business. But it's a good reminder, I guess, to never say never.
so so it's true though, if you go to school and major in something, you can come out and study that. That's good to know, because you're right. I think
You
with today's
can.
world, yeah, I think today it's like, well, if I'm not a doctor or an attorney, or it's just that broad range of what am I going to do. And I think sometimes kids struggle, so that's good. I think for any listeners out there that are, and they don't have to be college age kids, right? If somebody's going back to school, I think that's a good message for sure. So take me through. So out of college, and you're working through different opportunities. Was there a job you took, a mentor that you kind of saw and kind of grabbed your hand and said, okay, this is, I see that light in your eye. I see the dream that you want to pursue. This is the path. Or what was the kind of like the first big aha moment for you?
I was in student government I went to the University of Toledo and I was on the student government and had transferred my sophomore year to Toledo. So I didn't know a ton of people yet at this point, got involved in student government. And I was at this dinner at the university's the president of the university, his house had this small group of people over. And I went to this dinner and was sitting down, and I'm like a sophomore, like I don't know anything. And I'm sitting next to this person who's asking, who finds out I'm a PR major and is asking me about like communication and like how is the university doing from a communication standpoint. And I'm like 19 or 20. I'm just like shooting from the hip and saying like what I think, how it's going, and what they could be doing better. Well, it turns out he was the vice president of communication for the university, and he offered me an internship basically on the spot, like told me to come and see him on Monday. He wanted me to come and intern for him. And I ended up interning in the university's PR office for like 2.5 years. And he was such a good mentor for me. And some of the other people in the office were just incredible with me and, helped me understand the field of PR, gave me access to opportunities that like 19, 20-year-old kids don't normally have access to. But it was such a good hands-on opportunity. And then kind of he introduced me to the person who ended up hiring me at my first job. Then like fast forward almost 10 years. And when I was getting ready to go out on my own, I reached out to him and asked for advice, and he gave me really good advice. And so, and even at my first job in Toledo, like I had really good mentors there who took the time to really help me not only like tell me what my assignment was and what I needed to do, but help me understand the broader context and and I think I always have really benefited by, I was never just like, oh, she's really young, like she can only do young people work or like entry level type tasks. I was always given more responsibility than probably what like a normal person my age I think was doing. And but then I also think I seized those opportunities and took advantage of it and like would raise my hand to say, hey, put me in, I want to do that. But then I think that ended up helping me kind of as I progressed through my career of like trying to find the people who were willing to help me and champion me and mentor me, but then also making sure that like I was taking advantage of those opportunities.
I want to go back to that, because I don't think a lot of people recognize how powerful that is. When you said, raise my hand, pick me, put me in. And I think, that's probably the bug of an entrepreneur, right? Even before you launched on your own, is getting to that scary place of, I'll take this next leap. And in your case, it was still working for another company, but I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll try. And so take me through that. Like, has that been did that mindset help you then eventually start Geben and start, the idea and the dream of maybe I could run my own show someday?
Yeah, I think I have some good examples of just like bet on yourself and like it'll work. Even when I was when I was in Toledo and I was working for the agency, it was a public affairs agency, and I happened to get I was a political science minor. I love politics, and I happened to get very involved in like local politics there. And I was volunteering for different campaigns and had gotten like really involved and connected with sort of the party decision makers. And there was this woman who was running for city council, and she was very young to be running for city council. And they asked me to run her campaign. And I was like, I've never done this. I don't know how to fundraise. I don't know how to do any of this. But I was like, yeah, I can do this. And so I ended up being the campaign manager for, at the time, the youngest woman ever elected to Toledo City Council. And
Wow.
I didn't get paid to do it, right? Like it was Toledo City Council. I wasn't paid, but now that I like step back, I actually have never thought about this until now. But now that I step back, like that was a little bit of entrepreneurship in my own way of saying like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I absolutely know I can figure it out, and I'm going to outwork everybody else, and I'm going to figure out how to make this successful. And I think there's no deadline like election day. I still function like that. Like if you give me a deadline on a specific day and I need a specific metric, I'm going to hit it. That drove me on election, back then on election day. And now I think even carries forward into like how I think I measure a lot of wellness related things. I set targets, like very specific goals at work. And so I think that sort of planted that seed for me that then carried through. And I have a sort of like a growth mindset and like a very much a yes attitude. Like I think I can figure most things out. That's probably the pro and con of being an entrepreneur. Sometimes that works out really well for me. Sometimes maybe I should just let it go and not try to figure it out. But that's also, I think, how I ended up starting Geben. I was working for an agency in Orlando. It was around when social media got to be a thing. I tried to make a case for us having social media services. And this is a very long story short, but the partner in charge of business development looked at me and was like, Heather, no one here is ever going to make money off of social media. And I don't like when, first of all, I don't like when people tell me no, especially when I know that I'm right about something. But also that just goes so far against my like belief of like, no, we can figure this out. And so that was a really pivotal tipping point for me, and then forced me to kind of think about like, okay, what's next? What am I going to do next?
Mm. I love that. That's extremely inspirational. Let me go back to then. Do you find like two sides of Heather speaking, like left shoulder, right shoulder? Because earlier we were talking, and the reason I ask this is because I know I at times come to crossroads with it. Is when the motivational, entrepreneurial, set goals, set deadlines. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I can't do something. Like I love that mixed with over here the dreamer. And to your point, right, like kind of like the airplane story or the 9 a.m. creativity versus the 2 p.m. How do you combat both voices of like the creativity minds going, just let it come to you, just let it come to you, and then the other side's going, no, we got deadlines to meet, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go.
Yeah, I think I tend to structure like things that I'm working on. I am very much a like visionary type person. Like I have the idea and I can figure out the direction that I want it to go in. And that's I think where like the creativity and the like big picture thinking really plays to my strengths. I have a very hard time with like the small detail, not even small details, the important details of like that are required though to get it across the finish line. And I think that's where, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, understanding like what is my strength and how do I build a team of people around me who balance and complement those strengths. I read this book called Who Not How, and I think about that a lot. That the question isn't how am I going to get this done? The question is who is the right person to help me get this done? And what is the
Mm,
piece of the project that I should own as the entrepreneur or as the leader? Where is my time best spent on this project? And then at what point do I then turn it over to someone else on my team and they become the owner of the project and finishing it and implementing it? And so I don't think it's necessarily like one side of me is this creative side and this other side is this like deadline, goal driven, metrics driven person. I think they are very cyclical and feed into each other.
They get along just fine.
Yeah, I think so.
You bring up a good point. I think where the shift in leadership has taken place, is in the old days of maybe the CEO, I don't even know if they would call themselves visionaries back then, but it was, their rules, their way or the highway, and they wore six hats, and it was how the term yes man became, versus now the way you're leading Geben is who, not how, right? Like how or who is the right person. Back to the Jim Collins Good to Great book is who is on the bus for the right reasons in the right seat. And so I think that's refreshing and so true with today's successful leadership. If you look at some of today's companies like Geben that are growing with that visionary of like, ego aside, it's Heather's vision, but she's putting the right people on, in place to make sure we get this thing to the finish line. So, is it hard to handpick some of those senior leaders to come with you? As far as it doesn't sound like the ego is there, where it's easy for you to absorb their talent and their ideas, but is that talent level hard to find right now in the marketplace?
Our leadership team, I think, is amazing, but they've all been with me for like 5, 6, 7. One of them is almost with me for 10 years. So they've been with me for a long time. So I think I've been able to hire people in at different levels of the company, and then we see then who rises to the occasion, like who's ready to be part of the leadership team. And not everybody is, and not everybody wants to be part of a leadership team. Like that's a very different type of responsibility, and not everybody loves that, and that's okay. So, but I think I don't I don't know that I think it would be much harder to hire from outside and add somebody onto the leadership team. I like this way that we've been able to do it, of sort of organically growing them within the company and then seeing who is ready for that next step or who wants to take that next step. I think there is something, though, to be said for sort of one of the things that I love most about Geben is being able to show that there's a different and better way to run a business. So to your point of like the way it used to be done, I don't think that we have to do that anymore. And maybe that worked for people back then, but I don't think that works very well for us now.
Right.
And if I think about like what are all the different things that I want to do and where do I want to have an impact, and I want to make sure I'm creating growth opportunities for everybody on the team, it's not possible to do all of the things that I want to do if I'm trying to do them all myself. And they talk about this in that Who Not How book also, that if you have these big ideas and these big visions, you have to have the right team around you to finish them. Otherwise, you're only going to be able to do a very small percentage of the projects or the initiatives that you actually want to move forward, because you're going to get stuck in every single phase of that project. Whereas if you could focus on the phases where like your unique skill set or your zone of genius is really relevant, and then hand it off so that when it's ready for someone else's zone of genius to then move it forward, then it allows you to get so much more done. And so I can have so many more projects moving at the same time and can have a bigger impact and grow the company so much better than if I was trying to like hoard it all and do it myself.
Mm, so true. Heather, I want to get into Geben a little bit deeper here. And I know you said you started with a firm in Orlando, and I don't know, is it safe to say you sort of heard a whisper of the entrepreneurial bug started getting louder, maybe, and probably back to Heather being the person that raises her hand and says, I'll go next, and I'm gonna take this leap of faith, and I don't have 100 questions answered. I'll figure it out as I go, which is such a beautiful journey to watch. What just, I guess the question it ringing through my head right now, what made you start Geben? Why did you, what was the vision of, I want to do this on my own?
I had been working at this agency, and it was an amazing agency, and I learned a ton working at that agency. And had gotten pretty close to the partner who was in charge of business development and learned a lot about sales cycles and leads and prospecting. And so learned that piece of the business at that agency. And this was around like 2006, 2007, 2008, when social media was like starting to become a thing. Everybody had like MySpace pages. Social media was starting to become a thing. And I was like the geekiest person in the office and wanted to figure out like, what is this and how does it work with PR? And so they told me that if I could find nonprofits that wanted to experiment with the intersection of PR and social media, that we could do the work pro bono and we could all learn together. So I created a blog and a Twitter account. This was before Twitter was like a cesspool, but I created a blog and a Twitter account and found these nonprofits. And then was sharing what I was learning and had these really great case studies of the intersection of PR and social media for social good. And then was getting invited to speak around the country about how PR and social media can work together. And through that, I was able to then see what other agencies in bigger markets were doing and how they were starting to sell social media services. And then that's when I came back and tried to make this pitch that we should do social media. Like there's a money making opportunity here, there's a growth opportunity. And then when they told me no, that was when I knew like their long-term vision for what they wanted was very different than where I saw communication going and the opportunity that I saw. And so that was kind of the nudge that I needed to think about what was next. And I'd been living in Orlando for about 5 years at the time I was married. And it was at the point where we either were going to like plant roots, like we were going to buy a house and like be there kind of permanently, or if we were going to move, this was the time to move. And we were both from Ohio. So we decided that was a good time to move. But it was also 2009. It was like the height of the recession at this point. And I had not been here. I hadn't lived in Ohio in over a decade. Like I didn't have a network here. Nobody was hiring because of the recession, and they for sure were not hiring PR people. But because I'd been going around speaking, I was getting some offers to do some consulting. So I knew like at least somebody was willing to pay me to do this. And so I thought I would go out on my own and see what happens and move to Ohio, do some networking. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then I'll go find a regular normal job. And that was 15 years ago. And now I have 25 or so people on the team, and it seems to have worked out okay.
Wow. I don't think I knew that about you, that it was kind of starting off as like a consulting and the timing with the economy. So that brings up a great, brilliant point. And I know I've gone through it, starting companies over the years, and it seems so common, but I don't think the listeners can hear it enough. Talk about timing, Heather. I mean, it seems like the timing was not on your side, and nor is it for a lot of entrepreneurs. So, both from a personal and a professional standpoint, talk about the timing. I mean, it looks like it was an awful idea, and here you are 15 plus years later with 25 people. I mean, tell everyone how you managed to get through the voices that say, timing is not good, this is a bad idea, this won't work.
I think that tends to be like your egoic mind trying to get you to play small instead of reality. And there's never a perfect time to start a business. There's always going to be some sort of outside factor or variable or egoic thought telling you not to do it. The reality, though, for me at least, at that moment, because of the recession and budgets were being cut, there were a lot of companies that were looking at the contracts and the spend that they had with other agencies that they felt like they were not getting the value that they needed out of that dollar. And so I was able to pick up a handful of my first few clients were companies that were working with other agencies where they were being charged significantly more than I was charging. But I had a decade worth of agency experience. I could do the work just as well as they were able to do it, but it was just me and my laptop in my kitchen. Like I didn't have an office and people and all of this overhead. And so my rates were much more reasonable and much more affordable. And so people questioning their budgets because of the recession with their large agency actually helped plant the seed for me to gain my first few clients and get some of that traction, because people knew they still needed help and they needed to find it in a way that was more cost efficient and cost effective than what they were getting with their current agency. So I would never wish a recession on anybody, but a recession isn't necessarily a bad time to start a business. It actually could be a time where you can get scrappy. And if there are people who are maybe resting on their laurels or charging inflated prices and you can figure out how to do it better and more efficiently, there's a huge growth opportunity there for you.
There's where that creative brain comes in, right?
Yeah, yes. And I don't even know that was intentionally what I was doing at the time. It was more so just, I'm going to just figure this out. Like, I really do believe that most of the time I can figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're open-minded to, it's probably not going to look like this a week from now or a month from now or a year from now, the vision I have, but if I'm willing to roll with it. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I didn't have a co-founder and I've never taken investors. So I'm really I own 100% of the company. I'm the sole like decision maker at the end of the day. So I never wrote a business plan. I didn't have to take a bank loan out. So, and I know sometimes there are requirements that force you to write a business plan, but I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I could try to write a 3-year business plan and it will be completely irrelevant by the end of month one because I can't write a plan based on all these hypothetical scenarios. I have no idea what's going to happen. So instead of writing a business plan, I'm a PR person at my core. I wrote a PR plan and that I knew how to do and I knew how to work it. And I worked the PR plan. And so I basically treated I treated Geben like a client at the beginning. And that I think helped fuel a lot of the growth too. But there was really no need to write a plan based on a bunch of hypotheticals.
Wow, that's a great idea. You wrote yourself a PR plan.
Yeah.
Very cool. So coming out of the recession, take me through things start to stabilize. You're like, hey, this thing has legs. I think I just created a company, and it's gone. It's got some success. What were the first couple of hires like? And you said, I need more. I need more boots on the ground. I need to bring the vision to reality. Of back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm the visionary, but I need the who. I need more people. And with that, Heather, what were some early obstacles back in those early days that, as an entrepreneur, that maybe you didn't see coming when you started to bring in? I think I think Dave Ramsey says business is easy till people get involved, right? And so, but we need people, right? So, as you brought in people, what were some obstacles that you overcame?
I never wanted to be in a position to say no to a really cool project because I didn't have like the capacity or the bandwidth available. So I always tried to hire kind of like a little bit maybe ahead of what like the accountants or the forecaster type like MBA people would say is the right thing to do. Um, so I started the business, and then at the end of that first year, I hired a post grad intern. She worked out really great. By less than 6 months later, then I made her full time. So within my first like year and a half or so of business, I made my first hire. I have always tried to stay focused on like, what is my skill set? What do I know how to do? What am I really good at? How do I stay focused on that? And like, don't do all the other stuff. Like at one point it was like a Sunday night and I was sending out invoices. I was like, this is dumb. Why is this what I'm doing on my Sunday night? Like, this is not the best use of my time. And so that outsource those things that you're not good at. I think sometimes you have to spend a little bit of money to be able to make more money. And that can be a scary thing sometimes for entrepreneurs at the beginning, but it's a good investment because it allows you then to spend your time where you're going to actually add the most value to the business. So I made that first hire probably about a year and a half in. Then I made another hire. And so over the first couple of years, I made like 2 or 3 hires. We had like sort of normal, reasonable growth. It was really fun back in the day because I didn't have an office. We were like working out of my house. And so everybody would just like, I had 2 or 3 people coming to my house. They had like a little section in my refrigerator where they would like keep their yogurt or whatever. And it was so fun. And it was just very like, we didn't have a handbook. Like there were not a lot of policies and rules. And so it was very fun to like build a business that way. And to be surrounded by people who they could have had jobs anywhere. They could have gone to some of the bigger, much more established agencies, but they maybe weren't the people who were going to go like start their own thing on their own, but they had just enough of that entrepreneurial spirit that they got excited about being part of building something. And so for me to like be in it with other people who were excited about building something together was just very fun and motivating. I have always felt a very deep sense of responsibility of like, as fun as it is, like I'm still their employer. I'm responsible for the food on their table and their rent or their mortgage or their childcare or whatever those expenses are. And I think about that a lot, that I have a deep responsibility to them and to trying to make sure that like I had never looked at a P&L before I started my own business. Like I said, I was a PR major. Like I didn't take a business class. I took a 6-week math class in the summer because someone told me it was easier. That was the extent of my math training in college. And so at the beginning, there was a little bit of a crash course of like, okay, I got to figure out how finances work and, how does payroll work and expense tracking, and sort of the business side of running the business was really where the biggest learning curve was for me, just because I had had very little exposure to that side of the business. But, was able to work with some really great coaches, had some good mentors who were very generous with sharing their information and teaching me along the way so that we could grow.
I love that part and I've heard it before, is the business part, and it's extremely important, right? The P&Ls and the spreadsheets and the balance sheets and forecasting financials, but at the same time, we don't have to have an MBA to figure this out to run, because I think, would you agree that how you figured it out was because it was tailored to your business and nobody knew it like you did. Right. So you're like,
Yeah.
well, I can figure out the financials because I'm in it every day. And I think that's where a lot of people start to come at it from 30,000 feet and they're like, it's too broad, it's too big. I don't know how to write this financial forecasting or, the P&Ls or what's Q2 look like compared to Q4. And it's like this cluster, the monkey brain gets in the way versus like, no, take it back. And is that did that give you peace of mind knowing like, I just need to tailor it to my business?
Yeah, and I think, I started working early on with like an outside like bookkeeper type person to help me sort of manage the details piece of it. But I think it also goes back to what I was saying of like my favorite part of Geben is being able to figure out how do I think a business should run and should grow, and how do we treat our employees? How do we think about profit margins? I mean, we're a for-profit business. Like we need to make money, certainly. But I also think, maybe when you go up through a more traditional like business school or MBA path, they teach you how it's supposed to be done. And then you become kind of wired to do it that way. I never had that wiring. I had to figure out, how do I want it to be done? What is it? What does this look like or feel like the Geben way to do this, or the Heather way to do this? And that, I think, was a big piece of why like we prioritize people and culture just as much as we prioritize profits. And my accountant might tell you sometimes too much. But I also think like I expect people to work really hard for the company, but I owe them then a lot of loyalty and investment. And so if that means we're going to make a little bit less margin, then okay, but I don't have investors that I have to answer to. And so it's up to me. If I'm okay making a little bit less margin, then that's all that matters.
Mm-hmm. Heather, there's a common theme here that I think it's a good segue is you talk about the early days of working out of your home and the community fridge was your fridge and, leading in now to the people over profits and, the conscious capitalism that's being thrown around a lot nowadays. And so take me through company culture. I feel like this is very important to you. It seems like it's in the foundations of how Geben was founded. It's very obvious with the stories you just shared, and where is it today? Like where does Heather lead Geben when it comes to culture?
So when I started the company, well, first of all, I didn't really know if it was going to work. But once I decided like this really was going to work, then it became really important to me. I wanted to build an agency that companies wanted to work with and people wanted to work for. And both sides of that were equally important to me. So it's just as important. As much as I need clients to pay the bills, I also want people to be like, oh, I really want to work at Geben. And it like, I take a lot of pride in when we get people from the other like big, kind of established agencies in town. Those people want to come and work here because it is so different here and our culture is so different. And when people come and they stay for years and years and years, or even when they leave for whatever reason, but then say like they had a really great experience at Geben and they were so glad to be here, that means everything to me. We, at the beginning, as we started to grow, there were some things that made Geben that we wanted to sort of codify. So we created what we call our house rules. And we've had those so the company is 15 years. We've probably had those for like 12 or 13 years, I think. But it's things like no jerks allowed and own it even if you don't own it, or design your day. Like these things that are so second nature to us, but I think are maybe very different from how other people think about business or what values, maybe normally look like, is very ingrained in who we are. I also think that what matters gets measured. What gets measured gets done. What matters gets measured. So we have measured culture from the beginning. For a very long time, we didn't do traditional performance reviews with our employees. Instead, we did culture reviews, or it was kind of like a 360, but the questions were all focused on like, is this person embodying the house rules? What are the house rules they're most embodying? What are the ones they're least embodying? And we would provide very specific feedback on culture. Culture doesn't have to be this like very esoteric, like intangible thing. Like you can put words to it, by putting language to culture, you can make it more real. And by putting actions to culture and defining what does this look like or not look like, you can really make something intangible tangible. And so that has always been really important to us. We do an engagement survey twice a year. We have what's called Geb Together. So Geben is the name of the company. Geb Together. We do like once or twice a year. We bring everybody together. It's like team building and culture building. And All of those pieces I think are really important. Our handbook is called How to Thrive at Geben, and culture is intertwined in all of that. One of our benefits, sort of a different benefit offering that we rolled out a few years ago is called Compassion as a Benefit. I think that employers can provide compassion to their employees, and not just in a like, oh, we care about our employees, but then we don't actually do anything about it. Like for us, compassion as a benefit is like, and there's a whole like one pager of here's all the things that are included in that. And it's everything from pet insurance to paid family leave to we expanded our bereavement to include if you had a miscarriage, you can take paid time off. We don't define who your family is. And so if you have a close friend who passes away or an aunt who passes away and you need bereavement leave, you can do that. It's not up to us. Like we trust our people to not take advantage. I think if someone's taking advantage of a policy, it's a personnel problem, not a policy problem. And so that culture shines through in everything that we do. We also have a 4.5-day work week. So it's not just summer Fridays. We close every Friday at 1 o'clock year round because we want people to be able to take rest and invest in themselves. And no one's doing their best work Friday afternoons. And so let's just call it and let everybody get an early start on the weekend.
Wow, that's beautiful. Listen, so much trust you have in your people, and that's what it has to keep the people. The reason you built that team, right? And you said you have some of the bigger shops in town looking at, or kind of want to be with you guys or be like you, and that trust is such a huge factor. Sounds like that your people feel they can feel from you. Heather, I want to go back to the team member, the employee survey that you talked about. Give me a couple examples of like what's the survey look like, because you're getting feedback from example 1A, right? When you ask these people. So, there's a clear, obviously, and it's funny, you are in communication. So there you go. Take me through what that survey looks like.
So there's a platform we use called Culture Amp, and so it sends it out. So it's really anonymous. Like there's no way for me to know who says what, and so we send it out twice a year, and it's asking everything about my people leader cares about my well-being. Leadership has shared a vision that motivates me. The benefits package at Geben is generous. So it really covers a wide range, and we do it twice a year, and we share the results out with the team. So I think that's the other piece that's really important is I think a lot of companies probably survey their employees, but how many of them are then so transparent that they're sharing all the information back with their team and then saying, based on this data, here's what we're going to do. So we do the survey. Our leadership team analyzes it. We read. There's also a couple open-ended comments or questions where people, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And anything else you want to share. We read every single one of those comments. We can't necessarily, if it's a one-off thing and it's that one person's individual experience, we can't necessarily create a whole company policy around that. But as we start to see themes bubble up, we want to pay attention to that. The commitment that we have to the team is whatever the 3 lowest scoring questions are on the engagement survey, we will come back to them with an action plan. So how do we get some steps in place to make sure we're improving those areas before the engagement survey next time. And then we report out on that. We do state of the agency quarterly, and we do a team meeting every other week. And so we're constantly sharing out, based on the survey feedback, here's what we're doing, or here's this new thing we're rolling out based on what you told us you wanted to see. And I think for the team knowing not only that we are sending out the survey, but that they can trust that we're going to take action based on that survey. We just did the survey a couple weeks ago. We had 100% participation. I think you'd be hard pressed to find another company that has 100% participation on their engagement survey. And then the results were really helpful. And thankfully, we're doing a lot of things really, really well. There were a couple areas when we sliced the data, we're like, oh, there is some room for improvement there. And now we've got a plan in place and we're working on it to fix it.
Yeah, I want to make it clear for the listeners. What I'm hearing is if you're out there, started a business, you're still in the startup phase of it and sort of like the first season of entrepreneurship, and the biggest thing is everyone's worries about making money and will it fly and where am I going to be tomorrow and next week. But I think one thing we can take from Heather, who's been doing this for a long time, is culture is the main focus. Here you are with this successful company of 25 plus people, and culture sounds like it's number one on your radar. It's got to just be a focus not only oh, I'll check in quarterly with a survey or monthly, but it's daily that you're practicing this.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. But I also think the difference, I think there's a lot of culture, maybe in some ways, has gotten a little bit of a negative stereotype of it's not like ping pong tables and beer in the mini fridge in the office, right? Like culture, I think, is are you aligning your values with your finances? And that I think is something that we take very seriously at Gavin. Like we are real clear on what do we stand for, we want to support our people, and then we put the money behind it to make sure that we're doing it. So it's not performative culture. It is truly, if I say that I believe in supporting people, then we're going to show up and support our people.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that for a hot minute. I know that a lot of times, and you're a for-profit business, but a lot of times they have this passion and this, well, I'd want to put this out into the world, but feel a little bit of guilty for making money because of it, And so how you mentioned this, I think it's a beautiful blend of culture. We're a for-profit business. We want to make money. We're going to take some of those dollars and put them back into culture, back into company, and not buy new ping pong tables or new kegs, but put into the programs that can make the people better. So what's kind of your philosophy, Heather, on an entrepreneur out there, someone that's listening that says, yeah, I think this idea can make a ton of money, but I feel like it's I'm more passionate about doing the work than I am about making money, and that's going to come second. Like, kind of, what's that? I guess the word I'm looking for is guilt. And if somebody kind of comes in and says, what's the self permission I can give myself to thrive and make lots of money doing it?
Yeah. So this has been an interesting journey for me the last couple of years, is really trying to understand like my relationship with money, and like it is okay to say that we want to make money. And money is not the end all be all, but the reality is money can make your life a lot easier. And I think sometimes people, especially women, don't want to like admit that. It's like the thing we don't talk about. But the reality is if you can figure out how to make money, it can't buy you happiness, but it sure can buy you ease, and it can buy you experiences that can lead to happiness. Or, it helps to have some money. And so, no, I don't think you should be 100% motivated by the money. I think you should be motivated to do good in the world, or to have an impact, or see your idea born out there and people using it and getting a lot of value out of it. But the money certainly can follow, and then will allow you to scale your idea and reach more people and have a bigger impact. But I think that if somebody is feeling like, oh, I don't really want to make money, I just want to put my idea out there, I think there's probably some work to do on like, why is that? Why do we feel guilty about saying that we want to make money? Um, we we have our house rules, like I mentioned. We recently rolled out our values, and so the house rules are sort of this aspirational, like you're not going to necessarily do every single one of them every single day, but this is like our North Star. Values are like the non-negotiable behaviors that we have to embody every day. And we put ambition in as one of our values. And I think that that's really important. First of all, there's a lot of talk about, oh, she's too ambitious, is sort of like a coded word to hold women, especially, back. I think you see it in politics a lot. Um, and I think it says something to our team and to our company that we're a company that is owned by a woman that has very much put a stake in the ground and said, we are ambitious. We are here to grow. We do want to make money. But I also believe that the bigger we can grow, and if we can make more money, we can have more impact in the community. So we have something at Geben called Give More, Grow More. We believe that the more we give to our clients in the community, the more we grow. And the more we grow, then the more we're able to give. So I want to make money, not because I want to have a bunch of money sitting in my banking account, but more so because I'm motivated. I want to have an impact on the community. I'm here. I want to do good in the world. And if you have some resources, that allows you to then do more good. So I think if you're feeling this like guilt or thinking small, I would re-examine maybe what is your relationship to money, and who told you that money is a bad thing, and how can you rewire your relationship to money?
Thank you, Heather. I've
done a lot of work on this the last couple of years. I've done a lot
Yeah.
of journaling about my relationship with money, and I've read all these books and podcasts and stuff. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I think that we have to lose that narrative. It's okay to say that we want to make money and that we want to use the money to do good in the world.
Sure. Well, it goes with, there's one side of it that's like that survival startup mode, mentality. And then there's the other, which we're talking about. And I think you've done you've done a lot of work and it's paying off, because that was a beautiful description of, how do you swim kind of right in the middle of it, right? And how do you kind of swim in
Yeah,
the middle of leaving that lack, or and everybody's going to, most people are going to go through it. I guess not everybody. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that are established who can get back into startup phase with a lot less financial risk. But I believe that your view on it's a great way to view it as more of a freedom, but there's also a lot of responsibility, right? And I feel like
for
that's
sure.
a good mix of it. Heather, I'm going to put all the contact info for Geben in the show notes. This amazing company you've built, and more importantly, the mission, the culture, everything that you've built along with it. Before we kind of wrap this up, I want to talk about. I know it's near and dear to your heart, the Women's Fund, and I feel like we can't quite put the period at the end of Heather Whaling without talking about, because I know you served and dedicated so much of your time. And I know I was pretty uneducated on it until I started kind of diving into the work you've done there. What's the Women's Fund? How long were you serving on the board? And what does it mean to you? And what impact did it get you to where you are today?
So the Women's Fund is a fund. It's a organization that raises money and gives out money for grant making for nonprofits that are supporting women and girls. They fund advocacy and research. It's just over 20 years old, so it's a relatively young foundation or fund. But the impact, I think, has been enormous. I served on the board for about 11 years. I was the board chair for I think about like 2.5, 3 years almost. And it was transformational for me. I got involved by going to one of their events like very early on after I moved back to Ohio, and I went for the event and didn't really know a lot about the Women's Fund, ended up falling in love with the Women's Fund. Raised my hand and said, hey, I want to get involved. Like, how do I volunteer? And I joined the PR committee, the programs committee, and then ended up getting asked to serve on the board. And then I was the chair of the board basically during COVID. So March 2020 through, July of 22, I guess, 2.5 years. And it was such an impactful experience for me to understand the wealth gap and the wage gap and gender norms and all of these issues, and to really think about, like, as a business owner, how can I make sure that I'm building a business that is equitable, and how can I use Geben to show that we can create workplace policies that support women. And that's what, we were early on with paid family leave and some of those things. And I just think the Women's Fund does so much good in the community. And I was so grateful to have the chance to be involved in it. And it's really transformative, the impact that they've had in Central Ohio.
Thank you. Heather, I have two final questions for you today. The first one is, Heather, what's one thing that you've learned as you've gone through this experience?
So I think that I have learned you have to trust yourself. You have to trust your intuition and like bet on yourself. And if you do that, you're going to be fine. I think there are some times maybe where I maybe didn't make the best decision, or I got a little sidetracked when I had too many other voices sort of telling me their perspective or what they should do or how they would run the business or whatever. And sometimes you just need to like silence all of the noise and sort of go inward and say, okay, what feels best to me? What do I think is the best thing? And trust your instinct. And you're not always going to be able to explain your instincts to everybody else around you, and that's okay. But like, your intuition will not lead you the wrong way. So like, trust your instincts and trust yourself. Bet on yourself.
Thank you. Heather, last question for you. What advice would you give to someone who's hearing the whisper of a dream or a path in life that just seems too crazy to chase?
I did a webinar, right? I was sort of in that same situation of like, I don't know, should I start my own thing or not? Do I really know what I'm doing or not? And I was on a webinar and the speaker said, don't let the fear of failure stop you from crossing the start line. So like, if the reason that you're not doing it is because you're afraid that like, I don't know if this is going to work, just try it and see. The reality is like, by the time you get to like the worst case scenario, there's a million different off ramps so you can change your mind. So you can start the idea, see if it's working. And if it's not working, that's okay. You can always change the path, but it can't hurt to start.
Awesome. Heather Whaling, thank you for being here today. I think the listeners and I will both go back and listen to purpose and passion and culture and how we are allowed to give ourselves permission to make money while having fun and doing chasing our daydream. So Heather, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.